Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. About a month ago, when we were still in the midst of the Bad Batch and we were talking about the clones, one of you guys in the comment section asked me about why the Jedi Order appointed Jedi Master Shaak Ti to Kamino. This is a really interesting question because this Togruta Jedi Master isn't exactly the best pairing or the most natural pairing for the cold and austere labs on Kamino. But maybe that's the point. You see, Shaak Ti, like Ahsoka, like most Togruta in the galaxy, hail from the world of Shili. This is a wild world in the expansion region, covered in colorful grasslands and expansive pine tree forests, which lay at the foot of rolling hills and mountains. It's a very picturesque and beautiful world. Much of the nature here is preserved thanks to the Togruta's fierce devotion to keeping their planet in balance. To them, the planet of Shili was sacred, and their connection to the ecosystem was extremely important. As such, the planet never went through an industrialization period, and the population remained spread out in small villages and towns across the planet. It didn't mean that the Togruta rejected technology or didn't have connection to the outer world. It's just that they chose to live a life in balance in nature, and perhaps there is some wisdom to that. And at least at home, on their own planet, they try to keep things as pristine as possible. Some Togrutas were so extreme about this that they walked the entire planet barefooted and would only put shoes on when they left the planet so that they could, enjoy every moment they have walking on Shili. I've always theorized that if a Force sensitive is born on a vibrant natural world, it allows them to tune into the Force at a much earlier age. That's because the energy field surrounds them and emanates from everything. The trees, the grass, the many wild animals in the forest, ranging from the terrifying Akul to small scavengers. If you grow up on Coruscant, for instance, like Qui-Gon Jinn did, you're going to sense living beings around you because it is a very crammed and packed city, but you're going to be walking on Duracrete. You're going to be looking through transparent steel windows, and it's a very different experience from actually walking in the grasslands and feeling every blade of grass emanate through the Force. Completely different experience. This is why Ahsoka Tano's Force powers are so potent at a young age, and this is why she became a Jedi Commander at such a young age, which probably wasn't the best thing. And Shaak Ti, well, she was also somewhat of a prodigy herself. But again, it seems very strange to take a Togruta who is connected to the natural world and then stationing her on Kamino, in Tipoca City, one of the most sterile places in the galaxy. The Kaminoans were the complete opposite of the Togruta. Due to a series of natural disasters, their entire planet was submerged after the polar ice caps melted on their planet. The species was forced to turn to science and genetic modifications to adapt themselves, and also much of their flora and fauna to their new watery world. And so, why would you put someone like Shaak Ti in charge of something as unnatural as the mass cloning and modification of human beings? Well, that's because I think the Jedi to some degree still believed in balance, and their hope was most likely that Shaak Ti would not just go along with the wishes of the Kaminoans' fanatic pursuit of genetic perfection. The Jedi knew very little about the entire cloning process and program. Remember, this was just kind of thrown upon them and the Republic at the last minute when they desperately needed a military force. And so putting Shaak Ti in this position was insurance that things didn't get completely out of hand. I mean, the clones already were heavily modified to be more obedient and docile, which is kind of messed up. There's also the completely evil advanced aging they modified into the clones' DNA, which robs the clones of their longevity. I guess with Shaak Ti running point on Kamino, she can at least prevent some of the more crazy scientists from doing something even more ridiculous. Like, I don't know, a third arm so that ARC troopers can wield the third blaster? Pew pew. Now, Shaak Ti was a soft-spoken and very gentle and compassionate person, but she wasn't a pushover. The Togruta people were one of the few species in the galaxy to evolve into a matriarchal society. It was not uncommon for females in this society to not only take care of their children, but also lead the household and provide for their family as hunters, or even travel off-world in pursuit of work. Now, Shaak Ti grew up in the confines of the Jedi Order, and so she was never exposed to the more fluid gender roles in her society, or at least she wasn't at a impactful age where she was old enough to understand these things. But maybe it's something in her genetics, but she still seems to exemplify the type of matriarchal leadership that was commonly seen in Togruta tribes. And there are differences between matriarchal leadership and patriarchal leadership. And not to generalize too much, but there are some differences between matriarchs and patriarchs, right? Shaak Ti was an extremely patient, empathetic, and nurturing individual. And I think this is actually extremely important for her role on Kamino. I mean, think about this for a second. Kamino is a military facility, a barracks, and a school all rolled into one. And in this city, we have hundreds of thousands of young clones, most of them mentally beneath the age of 10. Everywhere in this austere setting, you have males. You have male bounty hunter trainers, you have male scientists, you have clone brothers that are also male. I mean, yes, you do have female scientists like Nala say, but she's an alien and she's extremely cold and calculating when it comes to the clones. She sees them as expendable science assets more than she sees them as human beings. Now, Shaak Ti might also be an alien, but Togruta are near humans and are not repulsive to look at. And so for most clones, Shaak Ti is the only nurturing female presence in their lives, which is extremely important for a young clone's development and balance. Now, I think to myself, I grew up without any female siblings, and I've always struggled compared to my friends who have had sisters to be in touch with my feminine side. And this has become a bigger problem now that I'm a husband and a father. Right? Something I have to work on a lot. Now, I don't know if the Jedi purposely assigned Shaak Ti to this role because of this factor, but I think it's actually a really good move if they did. But anyway, the result is Shaak Ti is not only the commander of the Kamino garrison and training facilities, she also acts like kind of a mother for all the clones in this facility. Now, in Legends, the Kaminoans were far more ruthless to the clones. This is why I really hate Kaminoans. I mean, I feel like Nala Se did redeem herself a little bit, but still, even in the canon version of the Kaminoans, they're ruthless. They do not see these clones as human beings. They see them as assets. And, how else can you clone so many human beings without adopting that mindset? Now, in one of the more popular arcs of the Clone Wars TV series, we have the story of Domino Squad. This is a unit of cadets who continuously struggle to pass their final test that is needed for them to graduate and serve in the GAR. Now, the mercenaries placed in charge of testing these clones were either too impatient to properly train these clones or just were incapable of training them. And, well, the Kaminoans, they were even worse.
Are you suggesting we just cast off the Domino Squad? They're living beings, not objects.
You Jedi show too much compassion.
Thankfully, Shaak Ti does get a final say in this matter. And not only does she take personal interest in the case of Domino Squad, she manages to see the value in the unit and give them a proper assessment and notices right away what their problem is. When Echo and Fives approaches Shaak Ti and ask for permission to leave Domino Squad, basically they figured out that the rest of the squad was the problem. Shaak Ti gives them this very important and valuable lesson.
I am a Jedi, where the individual and the group are one and the same. Much like you clones.
Which is why Fives and I are looking out for each other.
As individuals, but not as a group.
Shaak Ti understands that in the real world, on the battlefield of the Clone Wars, Fives and Echo won't necessarily be able to choose their squad or run away from their problems. She teaches these clones that oftentimes we're just forced to deal with the hand dealt to us. Shaak Ti uses her empathy to find commonality with her men. As a Jedi, she also was never given a choice to join this war. As a Jedi, she too was trained from birth to be a warrior. This breaks down the barriers between the command class and enlisted men.
You are where you need to be. Solve your problems as a whole, not as individuals. I have decided to allow you and the rest of your squad to take the test again tomorrow.
Without Shaak Ti's advice here, without her maternal touch and wisdom, I'm sure Fives and Echo would have never made it as far as they did. Heck, they might have never even graduated and become clone troopers. And knowing both of these clones' combat histories, that would have been a huge loss for the Republic. I mean, Prime Minister Lama Su probably wanted to turn these clones into protein squares for more able units or something twisted like that. You can see in the profile of his face that Kaminoans look a lot like dolphins, who are amongst the most evil creatures on Earth. Anyway, Shaak Ti is always trying to compromise and find the best outcome in any situation. I mean, even when one of the mercenaries tried to sabotage Domino Squad's last trial, Shaak Ti puts a positive spin on the deceitful move.
Rick, your actions have brought out the best in these cadets. Perhaps the finest soldiers I've ever seen.
Well, maybe you were right, Alice.
Shaak Ti has no enemies because she's Mom's. But even Shaak Ti has her flaws because even the most powerful and wise Jedi are not perfect. Qui-Gon Jinn's Ataru ultimately failed him. Master Yoda's steadfast belief in the Jedi failed him. Obi-Wan Kenobi's steadfast belief in the Jedi failed him. Mace Windu's steadfast belief in the Jedi failed them. You're starting to see the pattern, right? Ultimately, the Jedi appointed Shaak Ti for many reasons, but one of the main reasons they probably put her there is because she was a sitting member of the Jedi Council. And to be a member of the Jedi Council, you had to be obedient towards the wishes of the council. And so Shaak Ti was an establishment Jedi. Now, that's not necessarily a terrible thing. I mean, it makes sense that you would want people who believed in your organization running it and maintaining its culture and vibe. But when the Jedi took up the role of peacekeeper for the Republic, they never saw the Clone Wars coming. And without time to actually think and plan what their next move was, the discovery of the Separatist droid army on Geonosis propelled the organization headfirst into a war and deepened the cooperation between the Jedi and the Republic and the military institutions. This cooperation was so complete that at one point these organizations were basically the same and fell beneath the same chain of command. Jedi Knight Bear Sophie saw this. I mean, her reaction, of course, was wrong, but she understood that the Jedi had become servants of the Republic's political goals and messages, and had abandoned their own mission to serve the people and protect the weak and innocent from harm. Jedi Masters like Obi-Wan Kenobi, for instance, long hailed as an ideal Jedi, completely brought into the war effort. For instance, when Ahsoka Tano and Bo-Katan Kryze appealed to Kenobi to send reinforcements for an invasion of Mandalore to free the Mandalorian people, he prioritizes sending troops to Coruscant instead because it is the political center of the galaxy and the Republic. It's a rational move, but it's also a very typical Republic move. The Republic's political power has always been centered in the core regions, and the Outer Rim and the peripherals have always been ignored. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, right here, is doing exactly the same thing. He's prioritizing one group of people who have political power over another group of people who do not. To make matters even worse, at one point in time, Obi-Wan Kenobi had thoughts of leaving the Jedi Order for Duchess Satine Kryze, a new Mandalorian political leader he had met prior to the Clone Wars. It's not that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Shaak Ti should take all the blame. They were just following orders. The blame really does rest on the organization. They should have never gotten involved in politics and the military affairs of the Republic. You know, Shaak Ti, just like Obi-Wan Kenobi, was very empathetic and kind. But she was also able to make exceptions to her beliefs and values in order to serve the Jedi, which was serving the political goals of the Republic. As nice and compassionate as she was towards the clones, she was also still running a brutal cloning facility that turned children into slave soldiers. I mean, what would have happened if a clone told Shaak Ti that they didn't want to fight and wanted to do something stupid like become a DJ or a YouTuber? She'd most likely try to find as much wiggle room as possible within the regulations of the JAR, but she would still follow the regulations. When Clone Trooper Tupper arrives on Kamino for scans, alarm bells should have been going off inside of Shaak Ti's head. This clone had gone into a trance and murdered a Jedi General in cold blood in the middle of a battle. This was a clone with a relatively short combat history, but nonetheless, he was seen as a very capable and loyal individual. For a clone to flip on a dime like that should have been worrying, especially considering the fact that the clones were randomly gifted to the Republic and appeared at the most convenient timing. I understand why the Jedi at the moment had to run off to Geonosis and use the clone army, but I imagine they'd want Shaak Ti to closely inspect everything happening in this facility on Kamino to uncover the true intentions of the people who designed this military force. And perhaps this is where Shaak Ti's ties to the natural world becomes problematic. She's clearly not a scientist or a doctor. She's not a geneticist. She just does not have the skills to uncover what's happening here. And so she just has to trust the Kaminoan doctors and scientists working there to figure out what's happened to Tup. Now, Fives would try to carry out his own investigation, and the resourceful clone did manage to uncover a conspiracy. But ultimately, he was too easy to label as a crazy person, especially after what happened to Tup. But I do give credit to Shaak Ti for actually listening to Fives. At one point, she was even suggesting that the inhibitor chips be sent to the Jedi Medical Center on Coruscant for further examination, which I'm sure would have blown up Palpatine's plans. But ultimately, she was subservient to Chancellor Palpatine.
Or even better, have the tumor sent to the Grand Republic Medical Facility here on Coruscant.
The Jedi Council requested the clone. I think the Chancellor is correct.
Shaak Ti was ultimately too trusting of individuals like Nala Se and Chancellor Palpatine, and they would end up outmaneuvering her, and they would also drug Fives so he couldn't deliver the information of Palpatine's treachery to the rest of the clones. And in all fairness, not many Jedi would have done a better job than Shaak Ti, given her situation at the time. Shaak Ti was a terrific manager and problem solver. The Jedi arrogance had also washed over her and blinded her to the truth. And because she lacked that objectivity, she was more inclined to, believe in the clones and the messages that the Republic government was beaming into her head. And we would also see the same type of establishment thinking when Shaak Ti votes to kick Ahsoka Tano out of the Order. Shaak Ti ultimately has a huge impact on the Clone Wars and Clone Army. Without her mentorship and kindness, I think many clone units would have never successfully made it to the battlefield. Her effect on Domino's squad brought us 2 fan favorites, Fives and Echo. Her compassion balanced out the coldness of the Kaminoans and the facilities that the clones lived in. She was ultimately very good at her job, and I think a pretty good selection by the Jedi Order. But even then, sometimes that's not enough when you're going up against a Sith mastermind.